Well, welcome to New Era Dementia and the Journey to Hope. My name is Ilana Gilg. I'm the program director here at the JCA, and it's so wonderful to see you all here tonight for this fantastic cutting edge and informative session. This program is generously co-sponsored by the Alzheimer's Association of Maine and is the result of many months of careful preparation. I'd like to extend my thanks to Tom Muser, Drew Wyman, and Amy Angelo for your help in organizing this program. Thank you all so much. And I'd also like to give a special shout out to my colleague, Adam Siegel, and CSCEP volunteer coordinator, Madeline Siegel, for coming up with the idea for this panel and then working so tirelessly around the clock to make it happen.
Thanks, everyone. It's great to see everybody. This is great. We're excited about this turnout. And I would also like to extend my thanks to the JCA and Alana and Adam and Madeline for helping us put this together. So thank you very much. So like Alana said, I'm Drew Wyman, Executive Director of the Alzheimer's Association Maine Chapter. I'm really glad to be here and see everyone in person and appreciate you all joining us. I'm also appreciative of the efforts of all the panelists here today from the various organizations for sharing their time and expertise to support families navigating Alzheimer's and other dementia. The community partnerships we have here in Maine are essential to help families. So many organizations are doing excellent work, and we really thrive to be in coordination with one another. So like many of you, I have a personal connection to the fight against Alzheimer's, and I first learned about it back in 1980 when I was 10 years old. Following the death of my grandfather, my family learned that my grandmother was in the mid stages of the disease. As a couple, they'd been hiding it and compensating for her cognitive decline, but she was clearly unable to live on her own. So we brought her into my house and to care for her. And we did the best we could with what we had. We were not educated about Alzheimer's and considered it typical aging and typical memory loss. And my job as a kid, as a helper, was really just to keep her company, which kept her calm. And on occasion, I would do activities with her, like paint her fingernails. I learned how to give her a manicure. But thankfully, we have come a long way since then in our knowledge about dementia and how to best care for our loved ones. This is due, in no small part, to the work of the Alzheimer's Association. We're the leading voluntary health organization in Alzheimer's care, support, and research. And we lead the way to end Alzheimer's and all other dementia by accelerating global research, driving risk reduction, and early detection, and maximizing quality care and support. So nationwide, there are 75 chapters, including our little chapter in Maine, which we serve the entire state with just 6 staff. How can we possibly do this? Well, thanks to our strong cadre of program volunteers, which Amy Angelo manages and oversees, we're able to offer right now around 36 support groups statewide, hundreds of public education and awareness programs, and several special events like this one tonight, thanks to the collaboration with our community partners. In addition, our advocacy volunteers affect systemic change at the federal and state levels, asking lawmakers to fund and prioritize the response to dementia. This is now's a good time to address a very common question, right? We get this all the time. What is the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? Well, dementia is really the umbrella term that describes the cognitive symptoms such as memory loss, thinking, issues with spatial relationships, language, problem solving, and other abilities that are severe enough to interfere with daily living. There are many types of dementia, but Alzheimer's is the most common, accounting for about 60 to 80% of all cases, and is defined by certain biomarkers like amyloid plaques, tau tangles, brain atrophy. And although our name is the Alzheimer's Association, I really want everyone to remember that we address all forms of dementia throughout our work. The second most common is vascular dementia, which occurs because of microscopic bleeding and blood vessel blockage in the brain. And it is possible to have more than one type of dementia, more than one cause, and that's referred to as mixed dementia. There are many conditions that can cause symptoms similar to dementia, including some that are reversible, and this is why talking to your doctor as soon as you notice any warning signs is so important. Despite the fact that we've made significant progress, the challenge before us is still great. Alzheimer's and other dementia remain a serious public health issue, and the prevalence and costs are substantial. Today, nearly 7 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's. just under 30,000 in Maine, and that is projected to nearly double just in the next 25 years. And health and long-term care costs this year for people living with Alzheimer's will reach $360 billion. And in 2050, this is projected to reach nearly 1 trillion. So we know the impacts are serious. More than 95% of people living with dementia also have at least one other chronic condition. And the family caregivers bear a significant responsibility for their care, just like mine did in 1980. More than 11 million caregivers are providing over 18 billion hours of unpaid care valued at $364 billion. So I know there's no way you're going to remember any of those statistics, but there is we have one page on our website dedicated to that, alz.org/facts. And those are constantly updated. We release a report every March with all the current data. Another thing that the association does, we address the public health crisis by promoting brain health, providing education and support to the millions who face dementia every day, advancing critical research toward methods of treatment, prevention, and a cure. And collective progress has really led us to this point in time, this is why we are calling it the new era of hope. There are several reasons for us to feel hopeful. First, research funding is at an all-time high, allowing scientists to leave no stone left unturned, which was not always the case. Thanks to bipartisan advocacy efforts and congressional champions like Senator Collins here in Maine, current Alzheimer's research funding at the National Institutes of Health is now at $3.8 billion. That's a good number to remember, $3.8 billion a year. And just over a decade ago, NIH funding for Alzheimer's hovered right around 400 million. So that's a result of a lot of great advocacy work. We're also the largest nonprofit funder of Alzheimer's research globally, including we fund research right here in Maine. And we host an international conference. We connect the global scientific community to learn and collaborate and share information for maximum impact. We're also nimble enough, we're able to bridge gaps in research funding by enabling young researchers to continue their work until they are established enough to apply for federal funding, like an indie record label, right? So, and finally, we have 2 FDA-approved treatments that aim to slow the progression of Alzheimer's for those in the earliest stages. And although that's not a cure, the new treatments have given families some hope, and it's also encouraged earlier conversations with doctors regarding warning signs and early detection. And this is really just the beginning. And then third, new diagnostic tools such as the blood-based biomarker tests will improve access to early diagnosis, particularly in rural and underserved areas. Right now, we just have the PET scan and spinal tap. Finally, we're working to usher in a new era of better care. Last year, Medicare announced a nationwide pilot program called GUIDE to test a new methodology for dementia care management that the Alzheimer's Association has long advocated for, and we have 2 health systems in Maine participating. So we have more hope than we could only have dreamt about 40 years ago. With more knowledge, resources, and support, we can maintain a high quality of life after diagnosis and help individuals live their best life. We're eager to work on behalf of Mainers, and we continue to advocate for improving quality care and assuring a competent workforce. Thank you, GWEP and Dr. Weary, who's here. And advancing risk reduction and promoting cognitive health like we're all doing right now today. Thank you, Tom Musser, and thank you, JCA, and all of you who are participating. We want to increase early detection and ensure accurate diagnosis. Dr. Blake is here from Maine Health Geriatric Center, you heard from her. And enabling a coordinated state response to the growing Alzheimer's crisis with the AAA's Southern Maine Area Agency on Aging is here. I see somebody. And all who are involved in the Maine CDC's Healthy Brain Initiative work. Everyone has access to our 24/7 helpline, 800-272-3900, and we have our resources on the table back there. And our website, alz.org, is full of information, all at no cost. And we are just so happy to have so many great community partners. Maine is a small town. We couldn't do this without each other. And I really appreciate you all being here and taking information back to your own communities. And it is with my great honor and privilege to introduce a very dear friend, Ralph Carmona, Professor Ralph, who's an advocate. He's been to DC with us, and he's also just joined the National Alzheimer's Association Early Stage Advisory Group. Ralph, thank you all.
You're gonna have to lower this for little people here. Okay, now this is kind of like a homecoming for me. I see people here I hadn't seen for 9, 10 years. Judy Rosen over here at the mayor's office. I see Dina Weinstein. These are characters that kind of permeated the community. Sam Cohen over there, yes, operations, your operations guy. I'm thinking, whoa, this is something. So it's kind of exciting to be here because at least I'm reconnecting with people in this little village we have in Portland. Well, let me begin by telling you that to a large extent I have a personal problem, and it is connected with a public issue that involves you people in this room. That's why you're here, right? It is a personal problem that was brought to my attention by my best friend and my wife, Vana Carmona. About 10 years ago, I had run for local public office in Portland, and I was thinking about writing a book, which I'm working on. There's as I mentioned, Sam, there's a real Jewish thread in it, but that's another conversation. And I began to teach at Southern Maine Community College. So suddenly, out of the blue, my wife comes to me and says that she thinks I have attention deficit disorder. She says, you're forgetting things. You're not remembering things. And that's a problem. Now, if you had that kind of exchange with your spouse, what would be the first reaction? Not good, right? Well, this was no exception. We had these horrific arguments, but then we agreed that, okay, let's go see a neuropsychologist rather, and find out what the problem is. So he did his testing that kind of got me confused. But he said, no, Ralph, you don't have ADD, but I think you might have MCI, mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's. So then we went to go see a neurologist, and the neurologist gave us this test, and he confirmed that I have MCI. Suddenly, the lights really went on, and I thought, well, what's next? Well, you need a brain scan to really see what's on your brain, whether there's this amyloid protein on your brain that spreads and becomes dementia. What's the insurance cost? Will insurance cover it? No, thousands of dollars for a spinal tap or a PET scan. Then I really began to get fearful. I said, gosh, I have this memory loss my wife has discerned. What happens when this evolves into this dementia where there's a disconnect between the brain and the body? Like what happened to my mother, who had 15 years of dementia until she passed away at 97. This was really a situation of dark and dread for us. What were we going to do? But then there was light in this tunnel of doom and gloom. The neurologist turned to us and said, you know, he goes, science is beginning to engage in this process and seek answers to this problem. Really? He said, there's clinical trials that are out there to look at drugs that might diminish this stuff on your brain. So we got together with him and we started looking for a place where there was a clinical study, and Boston University was providing it. My wife jumped on this, got me into this clinical study. At least we'd get a brain scan. They confirmed I had this protein on my brain. And from there, what happened was for the next 9 years, I found myself driving to Boston University, taking these infusions with potential side effects, the worst being the bleeding of your brain. In doing this whole process, I wondered, well, there's a testing There's a scans, the scanning to check, make sure nothing's wrong with you after a certain period of time. My wife and I signed a consent form, not knowing if we were taking the drug or some harmless placebo. But then something interesting happened. 6 months into the infusion, my wife went to the researchers and said, my husband's taking this drug and it's working because I don't have any problems with him anymore. and they said, that's great, but unless the FDA approves this drug, you will never know whether he's taking the drug or not. So this was 6 years. We're 6 years into it. We continued this. And then suddenly, 9 years later, the FDA, last July 2023, approved this drug, which is today called Leqembi. And my wife was right. I had been taking this drug since day one. Isn't that interesting? The personal, again, personal trouble, the personal became public. We were viewed as heroes because we engaged in this clinical process that basically is going to help millions of people in this country and around the world. My personal problem became a public interest when we demonstrated that science can help society in terms of dealing with diseases like this. So, C. Wright Mills is right. None of us is alone. We are all connected in this public square of society. And when I see people like you in this room and conversations I've had, you have a concern. And that gives me hope that the work's going to go on, the cause is going to endure, and the dream of seeking solutions to this problem, like the drug I'm taking, but real solutions. I like to take a pill instead of infusions, for instance, And I'd like to see have a drug come up, which is an experiment that wipes it out completely, the thing on your brain. The dream will never die. Okay? Thank you.
I'm Tom Muser. I am a clinical psychologist and specialist in aging. I've lived in Maine 6 years. I moved here 6 years ago because I'm a primary caregiver for my dad, who has now moderate to severe dementia. My first memory of dementia was my great-grandmother, who I saw when I was a teenager and in a very sad state in a nursing home. And I know at that time, quality of life for persons with advanced dementia, well, it wasn't very good. What gives me hope, in addition to everything that both Drew and Ralph have shared, is that there is a true understanding and acceptance of persons with dementia and their families that did not exist 30, 40 years ago. The personhood, the lived experience, the wisdom of persons with dementia matters. And I think that part gives me hope. In the case of my own father, he lives in the present. He still has flashes of memory from his past, and I relish those moments. I've become the keeper of his memories. Fortunately, my memory is still good, knock on wood. And so now when I reminisce with my dad, I remind him of his life story. And he's like, oh yeah, I remember that. Something else I did with him, much of my career was in academia. I recently retired from the University of New England, where I ran the Aging Center. Some of you I know from that period. Throughout my career in teaching, I've taught students how to interview older adults about their life stories and life wisdom. And I thought, I better practice what I preach. So I sat with my dad in a video camera many years ago, and we recorded 5 hours of his life story. It was really interesting. One of the memories that stands out from the first time we sat down is he said, I had a very traumatic childhood. I'm not talking about it. I said, fine, you only talk about what you want to, Dad. Guess what we talked about for 3 straight hours? Traumatic childhood. We recently sat down and rewatched those videos together in his moderate to severe demented state, and he sat there smiling and nodding. For him, it was a way to reach back in time and touch himself when he was still himself. But you know, that also gave me hope because that man I've always known and loved is still there. And I was talking to one of you earlier, gentleman here in the front, about that paradoxical nature of this disease, that there are those flashes, those moments when we can celebrate even with the person with dementia. So there's a lot to be hopeful about. I am the moderator for this, I would hope, I know is going to be a tremendous panel, and I don't like standing behind the panelists, so I'm going to ask Drew to put the bios up for me with the slide clicker. So our panel tonight is intended to raise awareness about what is Alzheimer's, some of the issues regarding diagnosis, but some of the larger quality of life contextual issues as well. And we want to make it as personal as we can. So while the panelists are speaking, hold your questions, but please know when we're done, we're going to open the floor and pass the mic, and feel free to ask as many questions as our time will allow. When we do get to that point, please introduce yourself and what you do, because there are a number of professionals in this room I know who could be probably sitting up here. So I'm very pleased to welcome our 4 panelists today. You can read their bios on screen. Dr. Rachel Blake is a geriatrician with Maine Med, and she's waving at you. I got to work with Dr. Blake around some research, and I just got to really appreciate Dr. Blake's perspective and her energy and her drive, and I'm very pleased to have her today here. Dr. Susan Wary, the amazing Dr. Susan Wary. Any of you who know Susan knows that she is a force, and I mean that in a positive way. Susan is a geriatric psychiatrist who has both worked clinically, but she's done a lot of policy and advocacy work in her time. And you're going to learn about what she does, alluded to by Drew, to educate health professionals here in Maine about how to work with persons with dementia. We go with the next slide, please. And Ruben, who's raising his hand, Ruben Siegel, as you can read from his bio, is a retired attorney who has also a very rich and varied life experience. And I got to know Ruben through Madeline Siegel here through the JCA, and Madeline's raising her hand in the back. They have some connection, I think. Ruben is here because he, like Ralph, has found a path to live and, I would say, thrive, despite struggling with a disease that has, implications for quality of life. And he's going to share some of his thoughts about that as we go forward. And last but not least, Amy Angelo. Amy is a good personal friend of mine. She is a dynamite program manager for the Alzheimer's Association. I encourage you to talk to her afterwards, share ideas about programs that you want at your organization or community, and she'll find a way. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started with our panel discussion, and I'm going to probably move up here and sit here. I'm also a videographer by hobby, so I might play with my video camera while people talk. But Dr. Blake, we're going to address the first question to you, and your microphone is ready and on. It is.
I think it's working. Is that okay?
You hear it? Okay. So what are the benefits of early diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, and what makes this possible today?
Well, first, I will say it's a very exciting time. So I've been doing this job. I work with Maine Health, and I'm at the memory clinic affiliated with the hospital. I've been doing this job about 12 years, and I would say the last 1.5 to 2 years has been the most exciting time to be in this field. There are so many moving parts. So yeah, in terms of the benefits of early diagnosis, I think there are many. Scientifically speaking, we're looking at the possibility of several new treatments rolling out. We've already got 2 FDA-approved treatments in the last year and a half, but we're also looking at a plethora of other options coming forward. And so earlier diagnosis means earlier access to those treatments, also the option of participating in clinical trials. I think from a social standpoint, the earlier the better in terms of talking with patients and families about this diagnosis and what to expect, but also providing support and getting them connected with the right resources. So from a planning perspective, I think it can really be a benefit. And, you know, I think a lot of the fear comes from the unknown. And so giving people an understanding of what's going on, I think can often be a relief. So in terms of what makes it possible, that's the really exciting part. There have been a lot of great strides with that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but we have a lot more diagnostic tools than we had even 6 months ago.
So we heard from Ralph about his wife's observations of early symptoms. But as you work with families around what they notice and sort of those progression, what are the things that people should be thinking about looking for?
Well, I think, you know, as you saw earlier in Drew's presentation, there are different things that can affect the brain, different cognitive changes that can happen. Alzheimer's disease is typically characterized by a pretty prominent short-term memory impairment being kind of one of the first things that tends to emerge. We also see difficulty with what we call executive function, which I often tell people is sort of like the front office of the brain. So organizational skills, attention and concentration, sequencing, things like having trouble with a recipe or more complicated tasks that didn't used to be challenging. Those are things we pay attention to as well. But really the short-term memory aspect is one of the larger things we're looking at.
Right, thank you. Next question for Dr. Wary. You know, changes in memory and thinking are common in aging. How can we better educate and empower families to acknowledge and address this in a way that works?
Yeah, you know, I think that there are a lot of ways, and tonight is one of them. I mean, I have to say, like Dr. Blake, I've been at this a long time. 40 years, in fact, I've been a physician. And in the early part of my career, not only did we not talk about it, when I would raise questions about older adult mental health, I was told as a young physician, don't waste your time. Well, I have been interested in older adult health long before I became one, and you can bet that I'm even more invested now. So I really think, Tom, that one of the ways that we help families and ourselves is by having the conversation over and over, holding events like this, and really speaking kind of candidly about what is and what isn't dementia, what is and isn't normal changes associated with aging, because dementia is not a normal part of it, right? So there are cognitive changes that occur as we age. Our memories aren't as good. You know when that change is measurable? Around age 30. Okay? So I get it. Things change. We are not as fast. Our processing speed is not as fast. But not all cognitive change with aging is MCI or mild cognitive impairment, but some of it is. All mild cognitive impairment is not early dementia, though some of it is. And I was so happy to hear Drew, and I want to underscore it, point to the fact that even that mild cognitive impairment that is early dementia, some of it is reversible. And some of it that is not reversible, we have new ways of approaching. So these are the reasons that I'm hopeful, but frankly, because of my experience, I'm just so glad that we're talking about it. And we're talking about it in a way that is straight talk, not false hope, not sugarcoating. Some of us are going to get dementia. Some of us are going to get heart disease. Some of us are going to get cancer. I get it, no matter how healthy we are. I mean, how good our lifestyle. So we want to prevent what we can and promote good health in what we can't. And so I think the way families deal with this is by talking about it.
Mhm. Yeah, it can be a life-changing diagnosis. And yet, in my own experience, some elements of normal life continue and even can be enhanced. It takes, though, a willingness to step forward and acknowledge that the change is happening. How do you support individuals and families to go in and see someone like Dr. Blake?
I think a couple of ways. One of the things that I've become increasingly fond of, and I was so glad to meet Ruben before the event started and to hear from Ralph, I think we underutilize people living with dementia as peer supporters. We have a lot to learn from the disability community who have been promoting the nothing about us without us for a very long time. So I think the one way you help families is to make sure that anybody with cognitive change or with MCI or early stage dementia is connected to what is a wonderful national support network of peer support. So people with dementia are not alone. Care partners are not alone. There is the same kind of national support for that. I think it is important that we look to lived experience, as we're about to again, for hearing real ways that people can thrive with dementia. So I think that what families need to hear and what people living with dementia need to know is that life doesn't end, and it is important to find the ways to accommodate the brain changes to still be able to contribute. So I've become kind of a proponent of the dementia as disease and dementia as a disability. Because when we think about disability, we think about accommodation, we think about integration, and I think that's another paradigm shift, along with the others that Drew mentioned, that's going to take us another leap forward. So thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, please clap whenever you want to, particularly when you hear gems like that. So I'm going to take it back to Dr. Blake. So, it used to be said that you didn't know if a person had Alzheimer's until an autopsy happened after death. The playing field is very different today. We have new ways of testing memory. We have new ways of recognizing symptoms. We have study of biomarkers has been mentioned. Even a blood test seems to be emerging. So how does that context both influence your work as a geriatrician, and what does it mean for families who are, venturing into this space, this new playing field?
Well, I think overall it's been a very positive change. The advent of biomarker testing has really shifted a lot of things. I do think, in our clinic, the first thing we do is take a thorough history. And I still think that's the most important part. Talking with both those who are affected and their families, understanding their experiences and what changes have occurred, and really looking at the big picture as much as we possibly can. One of the things I'm always looking for are things that are reversible, right? Making sure that we're not missing something simple like a thyroid disorder or a mood disorder or something else that is readily treatable. And then, if it is looking like something that is looking more like Alzheimer's disease, starting to think about what the options are for clarifying that diagnosis and moving forward in terms of planning. And so up until just a month ago, really, clinically, we were working with, the biomarker testing that was available is very expensive and harder to access. So fancy PET scans, an amyloid PET scan, or a lumbar puncture, which is really nobody's idea of a fun time. Just within the last month, we've seen the blood tests come onto the market and be clinically available. So I am now utilizing that selectively. And I think that's going to be another major shift. I think the task at hand now is determining when to use that and how to be careful about it. I think it's not something that should be done in isolation without a conversation. But it's a really exciting tool to help clarify diagnosis, particularly in people who have very early symptoms and we may not have other ways of really solidifying that to allow them to move forward with the next steps in treatment. So this is a really exciting time for that.
So what I hear in this is that the sort of the bedrock of dementia work is still that traditional doctor-patient relationship, the interview, knowing the history, and I imagine involving family and knowing the history is a really important piece of this as well. How do you support families when you suspect the diagnosis is happening? How do you kind of prepare people for that news?
Well, I think, nothing is perfect, but we do our best. Actually, one of our social workers is in our audience today, Kathy Klein, who's an active member here on the board, I think. So we have an interdisciplinary team at our clinic, occupational therapist, a social worker, and myself. And so we spend a lot of time talking separately with, in the initial evaluation, talking separately with both the patient and their family or caregiver. And then, when we meet to discuss a diagnosis, we set aside time for looking at advanced care planning, local resources, and getting people set up with appropriate support groups and counseling as necessary. So I try to do my best to explain why I'm coming to the conclusions that I'm coming to and answer questions as best I can. There are a lot of unknowns still in this field, but we try to make ourselves available for that as much as we can. And I think the social work support is really one of the most important things. And I'm not just saying that because Kathy is sitting over there, but I really think that's one of the major benefits of our clinic.
Well, in working with older adults in general, but I think around dementia, interprofessional exchange and teamwork is critical. And yeah, I appreciate that part of your approach very much. So I'm going to come back to Dr. Wary for the next question. Simply growing older might put a person at risk for Alzheimer's. Aging is one of the risk factors. Having a family member may increase one's risk. That's true in my case. But despite this, many persons live long lives, maintain good cognitive health well into their 80s and 90s. How might lifestyle and maybe the way people choose to live their lives help either prevent or enhance quality of life, even if dementia is there?
Yeah, and I hope some of you are going to know the answer to this question and can give it to me at the end. And the question is this: how do you motivate people to make those healthy lifestyle choices? I bet there isn't a person in this room who doesn't know that physical exercise is good for you. Okay, so I'm going to sit here and say, well, physical exercise is important, and you're going to go, duh. Okay, but the question really is not what lifestyle choices, but how do we create conditions in which people can embrace lifestyle choices? So here's the science of it. Physical exercise is the #1 best thing you can do for your brain, full stop. It also, as it turns out, is good for your heart, it's good for your lungs, it's good for your bones. So exercise, I don't know any other way to say it. I've been saying it for 40 years, but what we know now is this. How much do you need? What's the dose of exercise? It looks like it's 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, or 150 minutes a week. Split it up however you want, and that needs to be aerobic. And here's the reason. We heard from Drew about the different kinds of dementia, like Alzheimer's disease, vascular disease, mixed, and so forth. We can control for some of the risk from other forms of dementia as well as Alzheimer's. So another is have your annual wellness visit, have an annual checkup, make sure that your hypertension is under control, and you may be able to modify your blood pressure with exercise, diet, weight loss, and medication, right? So what I say to people is, look, I don't care if you're 30 or 40 or 50, 70, 80, or 90. When you address your brain health in a focused way, I guarantee you can get a better quality of life. We know, for example, that things like stress causes a huge outpour of cortisol, We know that's toxic to the brain. So meditate, mindfulness practice, get outside when we finish, and be in nature.